Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Profiles in Risk. I am your host, Nick Lamparelli. So I'm going to try to frame this. It's 2.5 years ago. It's the middle of the winter. I'm going to meet someone at Boston Logan Airport, and what an event we had. While waiting for lost luggage, I got to spend a good hour or two in really in-depth conversation with someone that I feel like really educated me on insurance and technology and how they interact. And so my guest this week is Jennifer Linton. Jen is the founder and CEO of Fenris Digital. Fenris Digital is an insurtech company focusing on the ease, speed, and accuracy for point-of-quote systems. Jen has significant entrepreneurial and insurance background, and she is using that to help insurers be smarter and more efficient while making it easier for end users and insurance buyers to engage. It has been too long. I'm glad you finally decided to come on and join me. How are you?
Oh, it's my pleasure, Nick, and thank you for helping me find my lost luggage 2.5 years ago.
We got to spend that time like really digging into your business model and how you thought of things. So it was not like one of those shallow conversations where, we just get a basic introduction. We sat there, we had to wait for luggage, so we just decided to talk, and we kind of quizzed each other on this and that, and what do you think of this, and would this work? And it was fantastic. So that was 2.5 years ago. That, right around the time insurtech was becoming a thing. So I kick off every episode of Profiles in Risk with allowing my guests to have an elevator pitch. So I described you, but why don't you describe yourself to the audience? Who is Jen, and what is Fenris Digital?
I don't know if I can top your meet cute, as my kids would call it, but I'll give it a shot. So we at Fenris Digital, we streamline the application process. And we do that by providing scores and quotes on very little inputs, because we've built out an enormous amount of data and technology that enables our carriers and agents to do that in a really quick way.
Okay, that's awesome. So let's talk about that. Let's spend this episode talking about that entire process. And even to this day, I still get Accord apps. Even to this day, I will see insurers with these lengthy applications, and frankly, having questions that the broker cannot answer, doesn't know how to answer. Why is there the reluctance to change the application process and the quoting process?
Well, you have to look at it from the insurance companies or the agent's point of view. And I certainly came from this as an outsider about 11 years ago. I'd not been in insurance until I was literally thrust into it as the head of marketing for a startup insurance company. And I was struggling as well with, why are we making it so hard? And I learned there's really, at the heart of it, there's really maybe 3 or 4 things that make it a challenge, right? So the first one, of course, is it's a regulated environment. So if you're in admitted lines, you're filing all of those underwriting elements with your state Department of Insurance. And as a result, you have to abide by those. So that makes it very difficult. You've got to ask these formulaic questions. The second thing is really those legacy systems. It's not uncommon for us to run into a carrier that might still have a COBOL developer on retainer, or have a 30-year-old policy admin system. And so they're hampered. All their IT resources are going to maintaining the existing systems, and there's not a lot of space left over. And then I think third, just culturally, there's a sense that it's always been done that way, and we're a 100-year-old company. So if we change it, it might break. But I don't think that's the case as much. That reluctance is the case as much anymore. I'm seeing a big appetite by the carriers and the agents and the brokers to do this streamlining of their application, to know more about their applicants as they start the process, and then deliver to them a more personalized and let's call it easier application process so that they can more quickly respond with an accurate quote.
Yep. So when you were building your business model, how did you get around that? How did you get around, hey, we can't work with you because our legacy technology won't allow you to do this or that? Or walk us through how you tried to overcome those obstacles.
Sure. Yeah, having worked in the insurance companies before, by the way, I had a previous startup where we served telematics platforms up to the insurance carrier. So I like to say that much of what we implemented at Fenris has come by trial and error at previous companies. So one thing you will see on my walls is I never make the same mistake. I make a new one every day. So I think I figured some things out. Happy to share what we've learned, but there's still a ton more mistakes to be made. And by golly, I plan to make every one of them as fast as possible, right? And get that into place. But the key to unlocking an opportunity with a carrier is there's a few dimensions there. I mean, one, it certainly helps when everyone on your team has had significant insurance experience, because when you get into a conversation with a carrier or an agency, they don't want to have to explain insurance 101 to you just so that they can try your product. So you have to make sure that you meet them where they are and allow them to explain their problem statement to you and really understand what is that pain point. Because if you don't align on what you're solving for, I guarantee you, it doesn't matter what technology you apply, you're not solving the problem that they have. So you got to be really keen on that. And then the other thing is to really recognize that everything that you do that changes the way they do business has these ripple effects. So try to keep it tech light, right? An API or a simple interface where they can pull the information they need and then go back to their typical workflow process is the way to do it. So for example, we have been working really hard on how we pilot with carriers. So, we're getting up to about 8 to 10 pilots a month now. And that sounds extraordinary, but the only reason we can do that is we said, essentially, we'll run pilots every 2 weeks as part of a sprint. So our carriers contribute, their data. We score and run the analysis for them and return that to them. There's no API involved. It's just a batch process because it meets their needs to know if this has value for them. And then as a result of that, we've already sort of proven on a very small scale what that looks like. And we took it the extra step. We start to model what that looks like to their book of business, right? What would their increasing conversion rate be? How many more indicators of fraud could they add, right, up front to that application to kind of weed out the things that might negatively impact their book, and so on and so forth. So I think it's just really important to make it easy to work with you, understand insurance, and actually solve their problem. If you do those three things, you have a shot.
Is that something you learned from your marketing background? Like, is that, I'm trying to, everyone sort of says that. You are actively like implementing the ease of use, hey, let's make it easier, not only just in the application process, but how do we make it easier to POC? How do we make it easier for them to kick the tires and test us out? Would you give credit to your marketing background for bringing that element into this realm?
Well, if it works, I'll give credit to something. That's for sure. So, I think it comes down to something you hear people talk about a lot, which is, I'm just losing my ear, but it is put the customer first, right? And that's why you'll see even in our proof of concept, we're like, well, we tout the line that everything should be personalized, accurate, and easy. And if we don't do that in the way we interact, then how will they see that the solutions will do the same? Policyholders or applicants.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. I want to go into this is how we've always done business excuse.
Sure.
And how detrimental that excuse can be to business itself. So what effect does a poor quoting process actually have on a company? Can you talk about like the ramifications of, hey, this is the way we've always done it, but this is how you're going to get punished if you keep doing it that way?
Yeah, I'm certain, first and foremost, most people recognize that insurance is the vertical that lags in customer experience versus other verticals, especially online. So you have the potential that a policyholder, an applicant will come to your site or initiate a conversation with your agent, and they may have just left Amazon and done a one-click purchase. So this is a really incongruous sort of disconnect for the consumer, right? Why is it so hard? And yet, I love pointing this out too, so I want to ask you this question too. I know you're like,
I ask the questions here.
oh, okay.
Turning the fields. Go ahead.
It's a short one. It's a short one.
Go ahead.
If I asked you to guess how long this marketing campaign's been out there by Geico, where they say, give us 15 minutes, we could save you 15% or more. Guess how many years that's been out there?
That's a good question, because they just rolled out a new set of commercials with all of their characters.
I love it, right?
You go through and you're just like, wow. So I'm going to say 10 years.
A little bit closer to 15.
Okay.
And your smartphone came out 11, 12 years ago? Really, the Apple? So you can see that refrain is still solidly in our vernacular as a culture. So when a company forgoes the opportunity to show its best side at the initial point of meeting an applicant, they lose customers. Short and simple. People abandon the applications at a very high rate, above 50% generally. And when they do finish it, if they have had like something like a very difficult question for them to ask, they might have just fudged it, put numbers in, or the agent themselves also might be like, I'm going to make a guess. So not only, if you don't make it easier, you lose applicants, and cost of acquisition is pretty high, so that's a big cost. But you also progress applicants through that process with incomplete or inaccurate information, which then has downstream profitability impact.
Yeah. So essentially what you're saying is, for those companies that are still hesitating to upgrade, to make that transition to using the modern technology to make it easier, they're essentially losing business, increasing their cost, and probably being adversely selected. The business they do get probably is not matching the type of actuarial work that they use to create their rating system that's filed with the states.
It's a big problem, right? If you think about that underwriting process, and this is where we really help, it's all based on what comes on the four corners of that application. I still refer to it as a paper application, paper app, right? But whatever was provided by the agent or the individual, be that for personal lines or commercial lines, that came self-supplied. And that's why one of the key features of what we do is we utilize a lot of external data as reference points, so that we can then bring that in earlier than ever before for validation purposes, streamlining purposes, and also we build our scores on a lot of that external data. Mm-hmm. That gives insights right up front.
Yeah.
You know how to streamline that process, right? Because Nick Lamparelli probably shouldn't get the same exact process as I should.
Mine should be easier, right?
Right. So much more trustworthy.
I'm a great risk. I can't. Oh, I better knock on wood. I better not say anything. Yeah. Because it's raining now. I could get like a lightning bolt or something. Have we nailed down all of the reasons why someone leaves the application or quoting process? No. Why don't we run through a bunch of the different reasons why people will get in and then drop out?
Yeah, the number one reason is the long form. It takes too long, and they feel that it's repetitive, particularly if that application moved, the original application format was the agent, and then it moved onto the desktop and then the laptop, and now they've shrunk it down to a mobile, but it's still essentially the same form, so it hasn't evolved as the form factor has. So that long form fatigue gets to them. The second most commonly cited instance is that the questions are just confusing. It's hard for them to understand, what do you mean, my limits of liability, right? Those are not terms that the average consumer has readily available to them.
Yeah.
And then sometimes they just don't know the information, that the answer, or they want to avoid giving too much personal information. That can be a big point as well. They don't really want to tell you all the accidents they've had or all the claims they've had.
Yeah. So when we met at Logan Airport 2.5 years ago, you were so proud because you had developed this technology where you were asking me some personal questions. You told me to take out my license, and you're like, let's take a picture of it. And I'm like, well, what are you going to do with this thing? Are you going to steal my identity? Which, I don't know. Some weird things happened after that. Just kidding.
Really
No,
interesting, Nick.
no. But you were already showing off this technology that your team had built, where you took a photo of my driver's license, and poof, all of a sudden, like, an application came up and a whole bunch of, like, is this you? Is that correct? Is that correct? And all the information in the application was already correct about me. It, from a mobile standpoint, like, I didn't, it almost seemed as though to get auto, I wouldn't have had to complete that much more before hitting quote and getting my quote. So talk about that. Talk about, like, getting to that particular point and what it took, like the type of data you needed, the type of back office technology, the stack that you had to use and build just to get to that particular point. And then where are you today? 2 questions.
Sure. Yeah, great. So yeah, that was our first sort of prototype. And 2.5 years ago, we had just, I think I was 6 months into the company. And we had, at that point, we still didn't have any in-house developers. So now everything is in-house. But back then I was bootstrapping it, and I leveraged a really great shop to build the tech stack for us and build that. And it was essentially, we used a module that was white labeled, and you could drop it into any URL. You didn't have to download an app, because to me, it would be so counterintuitive to say, hey, get a quick quote. But before you do that, go to the App Store, go to Google Play, download the app. Yeah. It's also 2012, right? Or as my kids would say, you know.
The olden days.
like olden days. And so having that ability to read the barcode off the back of the license, of course, it's always, you'll notice, and maybe you did notice it, but the optionality is always there, right? As a consumer, do you want to take the fast path? That's what we encourage when we do white label this for clients, offer. Either they can enter, a little bit of information about themselves in a manual form that we can go to. They can go back to the traditional form, or they can do the license snap, which is this product that then is lightning fast for them. And by reading the back of the barcode, we're then able to pull in 14 questions that otherwise they would have had to hand type. So those fields are like your name, address, your date of birth, your driver's license number. Interesting information. Not every state has it, but if you're an organ donor, I'm curious how that, impacts certain responsibility codes. But it's really helpful. And from that point, then we do 2 things really. We immediately go to our scoring data tables, and we do what's called a lead screen. So we do this on all the personal lines. When we do it in commercial lines, it's called the triage score, because it's going to go to an underwriter to prioritize. But the lead screen immediately says, yes, like, Nick, we found you in our data set, in one of our 255 million records, and we also placed you in a household. We have 130 million households, to which we then append 1,000 or so elements. And we run the analysis based on millions of scores that we've done in the past to say, what's your propensity to buy? What's your lifetime value? Are there a few fraud indicators that we'll check up front? And we'll also give you a little sense of, are you non-standard, standard, or preferred, a credit bin. All of those things up front now make it possible to prioritize that lead, or to deliver a more personalized quoting experience that ultimately means you can also dynamically come back to us for the pre-fill. And so we really recommend that you kind of do your scores in stages. Otherwise, you run into a really 100% of the time, you tend to see that's a lot of expense to tack on. And our ultimate goals are conversion rate, lower the cost of acquisition, and better customer experience. So all that's happening in the background in a second or two. All you see is, hey, Nick, I found your record. Would you like me to go ahead and pre-fill your application for you? And you're probably like, that's not so bad. I'll keep going. And that was the premise of it even back then.
Yeah.
And since actualized it in a lot of ways.
So,
now, I have a fun story to tell you.
Okay. Yeah. We love stories on
Don't.
profiles and risk.
So you must recognize that many of my insurance clients may be risk neutral at best, or slightly risk averse.
At best, yes, I like
Inherently, insurance is law of big numbers, so they should be neutral. So we took the license snap concept out to some carriers, and probably a couple dozen. And the prevailing theme was, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing this, so I don't think my customers will. We'll do a survey, and we'll spend 3 to 6 months in committees deciding if this is a good idea.
Shocker.
Oh, I sense the sarcasm now. You're gonna have to give me an indicator. So that was disappointing. And at the same time, a couple of them said, sure, we'll try it in a couple states. I said, great. So we did over 10,000 license snaps. So when someone came to a carrier's website, if they were on a mobile device, they were sent then to our white labeled site. It felt like they were still on the carrier site, right? All on the up and up. And we simply enacted this quick license snap, pulled out the name and address, gave them a score, and sent them back. And it was fascinating because the apples to apples comparison, A/B testing wise, it was so much more efficient. You know, and we had literally over 70% who were the target audience for this mobile group immediately turned their license over and took a quick snap. They didn't have the hesitation that maybe you or I would. And it even was so fascinating that we could kind of tell a little bit of gender. If it was female, I would be looking for my license, and maybe 12, 15 seconds later, I would take the snap. If it were you, Nick, you'd be like 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. There you go. So the only part is you got to pull it out and flip it over. But yeah, so as you can see, it was fantastic to have the results, and then of course take those back out to clients, anonymize those, and say this. While you all were in committee, and we respect your process, but at the same time, innovation is really about test and learn. We were able to go out and test and learn it. And I love that. I wish I could find more clients always like that are willing to take a little bit of a test with us.
Yeah. I just had a tweet storm today. I forwarded or retweeted some economist who was talking about entrepreneurship, and essentially what it boils down to is startups or any business is they're just economic experiments. Even when they mature, they're still economic experiments. You've settled in on proving some of your hypotheses, but that's what it all boils down to. Did Fenris lose opportunities? Were there some companies that were just so kind of biased in almost like age biased or digital biased in that, hey, since we wouldn't do this as the executive team, our customers won't, deal done. Did that actually happen?
It did. And to that I say, I think that's starting to change. There's been a big change, maybe even in the last 2 years, to accepting the idea that what has worked in the past will not always work in the future.
Yeah.
But also when you think about, the other side of the coin where you might have an agent using this kind of technology, we ran into situations like that where our initial premise with License Snap was it was a direct-to-consumer white-labeled play, and we kept running into the fact that I think it's 2/3 of all insurance is sold through agents. And so that opened our eyes a couple of years ago, and we started sort of putting modules and scores and things together for the different use cases, right? So the agent could leverage really the scores and the data in their environment, direct to consumer, and then underwriters as well.
Yeah.
So really, you just have to meet the customer. My point to that is you meet the client where they are.
How about on the, what lines are you doing now?
We started, this has been a great evolution. So my team's expertise was mostly in auto insurance to start with, and it makes a ton of sense because almost 1 in every 2 US consumers shops their auto insurance every year. So it's a lot of volume. And we started with personal lines auto insurance. And pretty quickly, I would say within a year, we started to get the inroads that our clients were saying, no, that's really interesting. We heard what you're doing over there. We want you to do something for us in the commercial lines, particularly micro commercial, which we define as under 10,000 in premium. And unfortunately, back then, there just weren't the ready-made data sets, right, for us to build our scores on top of. So it took us a little bit of time, but we've since come to the point where we've now, in-house, we have the records on 30 million small businesses. So I consider us kind of the trifecta now. So from personal lines to small commercial lines. And then as of early 2019, we added a couple of life insurance clients. And so they're benefiting from some of our expertise with the incredible volumes that we see on the personal line side. See, life is on a much smaller, I guess, volume, right? So we can apply some of the scores that we have from outcomes on that side to streamlining the life insurance side, everything from determining which path they could take, knockout questions up front, who should get a needle stick, right? How is that best process to meet the needs of that customer, and which products and services are they best matched to? Knowing that up front just makes everything downstream so much more cost effective.
Yeah. So have you laid the groundwork in such a way that when you're approached or when you start to deliberate on a new line, do you have the groundwork in place, or is it kind of like starting over? Like, was commercial a little bit like starting over, and that like you need new data sets and you might have to have a different tech stack? What was that like?
Yeah, it really was the case with small business. We, as a company, we were committed to evaluating new data sources every month. So we're somewhat data agnostic in that when we find this new and emerging data element, we want to test the signal and see if it's predictive, if we should add it to our scoring capabilities. And we're somewhat driven as well. What are the underwriting questions? Because we need to have those to reference so that we can then introduce the scores on top of that and potentially follow up with pre-fill if it's a good quality lead for them. So think about it. The first year and a half, I think we pretty much only had personal lines information in-house. And so that we brought in property data as well, and environmental data, and then crime scores, and all of the things that sort of add to having the ability to almost put together like a quick quote, but it's accurate, right? Just on knowing the address or the applicant. Small business was entirely different. Nobody has ever aggregated data sets on small business commercial. It's so new Wild West, and it's growing so quickly that there's a ton of demand, and there are actually a few competitors out there that I think are really trying to make progress in this space. We wanted to go about it the right way. So yeah, we tried out several high quality sources for the data. So we could get a marketing data set on basically what we think is about 95% of all the small businesses in the US. And then the way we differentiate from anyone is if that small business is so small that it's one person, that it's Nick, right? Running I don't know, I don't think your podcast is a business, but
a hemp farm.
There you go. Cannabis, yeah. Everything's cannabis lately. This will date the podcast, right? Yeah, so if it's Nick and you don't have previous business experience, I can still look at this really unique scoring element, which is your personal responsibility score, and apply that to a micro business. And that, in that sense, this micro business isn't something we shy away from, because it's where the business is going. Everybody's running into gig economy, and everybody's got a side gig or a side hustle now. And it's overwhelming for insurers to know how to really approach that.
Yeah, yeah. So this is not your first rodeo. You're a veteran.
Nope. No, you're right. I was trying to think of an analogy, like I'm stupid enough to get back in the saddle a few times.
Yeah. You didn't learn. You hit your head so hard that you forgot how tough it was the first time. Walk us through your entrepreneurial background, because I think it matters, because I think ultimately it's the team, right? That I think the team and the culture that drives the success. And you have experience doing this, so you said, as you said at the beginning, you've brought a lot of those mistakes, the lessons learned here, so you can make new mistakes. You don't have to repeat those. What was your background before Fenris?
So Fenris counts as my fourth insurance launch in the last 11 years.
Wow.
And a couple of them were within very large organizations where I sort of led a new initiative or a new product launch from scratch. and one was a startup that was a telematics platform. And we were totally bootstrapped, got VC funding, a couple of rounds of that, and launched our product on 3 continents. And it was a lot of learnings. And I'll definitely go into some of the learnings if you want from each of those. But, you know, in every case, I think I got a little bit smarter, a little bit wiser. I got a little better connected so I could kind of pick and choose who I wanted to work with to bring back together my dream team here at Fenris. And I think that's the biggest learning, right? Is surround yourself with the most atrociously talented people that you can and give them a lot of room to run with it.
Yeah. Is that the big lesson? Any other lessons?
Yeah, but you haven't bought me a beer yet. So, yeah, there's so many great things. Let's see. Going back to the very beginning when I got pulled in, 2008 was a big year for me because I thought I was, you know, a big shot. I was flying on the corporate jet with the CFOs. I was doing mergers and acquisitions for a big Fortune 10 company, and I was essentially reporting to the highest levels of the company, and the board was reviewing some of my work. And I was like, I'm pretty awesome, right? And then the recession happened, right? And they laid off thousands of people overnight. I'm thinking, job security is not what I thought it was. And that brass ring is it's a little more tarnished. And that's when I had the opportunity to join a business school colleague and help launch this insurance company from scratch called Elephant Auto Insurance. And my big learning at that one was I headed up marketing, and I really just applied all of the curiosity that comes naturally to me. I was so engaged. I got to go around the country and do focus groups and sit one-on-one and 1-on-10 with consumers and just get into their heads. And I don't know if everybody gets that chance, right? Sometimes marketing is more of an academic or an operational process. And I was able to go out and understand, well, what is it like step by step to go through that process? And I could really see how this application process was so painful for them. It was like, you know, why is it so hard? And I wanted to do something about it then, but I couldn't because the data wasn't available. The appetite, you know, in the company and the funding was not towards revolutionizing that. Our core business was really providing insurance. You really have to leave insurance and become an insurtech so that you can sometimes run the innovation process at the pace you want to, right? But I learned a lot about just getting into the customer's mindset. And then I think with that startup, it was called Drive Factor, and it was a telematics platform. We ran that about 5 years, and then we sold that to CCC, which is the largest claims software provider in the US. About 300 carriers use their software. And I learned there that the important part of what you build is really the scalability of it. So if you build it right the first time, and that is all related to the tech stack and the core decisions you make about how important certain types of data are to you, it's really important to be agnostic in essence, right? Your core value is not the raw data, it's the scores that you build on top of that. And so that was really important to me as well. I never wanted Fenris to be a data reseller. I wanted us to provide value-added insights. Mm-hmm. And so we've created that as well with our tech stack in that, you know, we're able to pull in data ad hoc and in an instant that augments our scores without being locked into any particular source, if you will. Yeah. And then I think finally, just being at Allianz, which is the world's largest global insurance company, and getting a chance to be their VP of New Markets, which was a role they created for me, and I got to launch tuition insurance for Allianz. And we did that very quickly. I loved that because, again, I returned to my roots of just questioning everything. And I can tell you the best stories, Nick. That's where that drink will come in, of buddy jacking in with the call representatives and listening as people called in to get their quotes, right, or get their claims serviced. Being downstairs, yes, in the basement, stuffing declaration deck pages into envelopes.
Why are we doing this?
I know. I'm like, paper cut. I mean, all of those processes, all the way to sitting with the actuaries and understanding like what is going through their head as they run their tables, and even, you know, the underwriters as they do their processes. So my biggest learning from all of that was just make sure you don't assume anything, right? Don't assume that processes are in place. Just go understand at the core what that problem is and systematically start solving for things that are value added. And then they get addicted to you and you get to stick around.
Yeah. What sort of mindset does it take to be an entrepreneur? Like who shouldn't do a startup and who should?
It's really interesting. So do you have a lot of friends that come to you and ask this question too? Because they've been in insurance for a long time, they want to do something.
Well, I get a lot of folks that they've been in insurance for a long time, and it's, hey, I had this idea and I've been thinking, and I think a lot of it just boils down to the idea is a good start, but do you know what you're getting yourself into, because it's brutal.
I definitely don't disagree with you on that. You have to have a fortitude and maybe some economic reserves.
Yes.
If you don't have that in place, don't even start it. I like to make sure that people come at it with an MVP approach, because I think it does you a disservice if you go chase the money, like the investments, to get your business started before you go chase the problem that you're going to solve and how relevant it is and what they'll pay for it and all that, the economic information. So if you can build something, even at the MVP, the minimum viable product level, and show that works, to me, that's the sign of somebody who actually can think through how this process works. I guess in short, Nick, I would probably say don't do it at first blush. Don't become an entrepreneur unless this is something that you feel is your calling. Because once you answer that call, I'm so happy doing it. I know I could never really be happy going back. And so, if you open that door and you step through it, you're going to follow it through. So you're best served if you can fail fast. So lay out some parameters and tell yourself, if this doesn't happen, in the first 2 years, then I probably need to have a backup plan.
Yeah.
So those types of things, to be realistic about it.
Economic reserves. I always say 2 years, not necessarily 2 years of savings, but basically you're not going to get traction for at least 2 years. And that's why I think your MVP point just really resonates with me, because I always counsel, like, is there any way you can do this as a side hustle? Because you're going to go 2 years. Like, for some reason, 2 years seems like the magical point in time where even if you are not successful after 2 years, the stakeholders and your peers outside of your building look at you and like, oh, well, they survived 2 years. They're legit. They survived. So there's something there. They survived, so they're legit. So we can treat them seriously. But I just don't. There have been. I think there have been companies that get started. They kind of hit a home run to start, but I just think those are few and far between. You can almost expect it's going to take a while.
Yeah, there's certainly that positive selection in the media as well. The only ones you're going to hear about are the real winners.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, there's plenty plodding along. I mean, for Fenris, we thought it was so important to keep ourselves stealthy for the first 3 years, which is why you're now my first podcast. So Thank you for having me and initiating me into this podcast world. But we just felt it was so important to be stealthy because, the more you talk about things early on, unfortunately, you're probably going to change and pivot as you learn from clients. So you really want to, I believe, you want to kind of just do the show me state kind of thing, the Missouri state thing, right? Which is show me the results. And once you get those results under your belt, it creates that snowball effect, and you can go out and then you have something really to show. And then my favorite quote, which I think I can credit myself with this or attribute this to myself.
I better write this down.
Yeah, this is going to be good. An insurtech is like a dog, because every year is like 7 to them. So even if you're insurtech, you're a carrier or an agency and you've talked to an insurtech a year ago, have another conversation, because 7 years have passed for them. They're at that type of a pace.
Yeah.
Be prepared for that type of a pace as you run a company.
Yeah. It's there. I kind of vacillate between, if knowing what I know now, would I do this over again? I don't think I would,
I think you would.
but then
It'll be
like,
worth it in the end.
could I go back into the corporate world? I don't think I could. And, let's say I had like a successful exit. I already have things in my mind where it's like, oh, I think I would like to try this, and I think I would know how to go about doing it. That's the other thing with 2 years is it gave me the experience to know, like I was able to look back and say, if I had to redo it over again, this is how I would have done it, and that would have greatly sped up, getting to market, getting revenue, and I didn't necessarily need these other steps that I thought I needed when we first started. A lot of wasted time. It took like 2 years.
Yeah, see, you're already addicted to this process because you're thinking the next time I will do it better.
Time, yes.
Yeah.
And
it's true. Every time you get better at it.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. I've learned a ton so far. So I'm gonna respect your time, and I spend the last part of the podcast getting to know you a little bit. So I'm gonna ask you some personal questions, and I'm gonna add a couple because we're like friends. So I feel like I can get a little bit more personal.
I'm an open book.
What's your favorite vacation place? I know you're an entrepreneur startup and you don't take vacations, but at some point when you were flying corporate jets, you probably took a vacation or two. What's your favorite place to go to vacation?
Yeah. Well, part of, I think, the reward for me is to be able to spend, those vacations with my family, because that's precious time. And that's really what's most important. So I try to make sure that my very favorite vacation I ever took was after we sold one of the startups. And I had a bazillion frequent flyer miles, and I took all the kids and my husband around the world. And we literally circumnavigated the globe with stops in Cairo, Thailand, a couple different places in Thailand, Australia, and then China. And I loved it because I got to spend all this quality time with my kids. We were off the grid a little bit and opened up their eyes and my eyes, right, to just everything that I had been missing for the last few years. So highly recommend, if you can, take any kind of trip you can where you're backpacking, where you're really with the locals. Forget those luxury resorts, right? Maybe someday I'll aspire to that.
How am I supposed to shower?
Oh no! Shower. Who's gonna smell you? They smell just as bad.
How old were the kids?
At that time, I've got 3 girls, and I'm all into like girl power for all those good reasons. But we had high school, middle school, and elementary school.
Oh, what a great experience for them.
Yeah, it was really great.
You still talk about it?
Yeah, so I feel like they, the important part is to make sure that they can remember it, that they're old enough. They each had a backpack, and they had $30 for one souvenir. So that was it. I think that's the way to go. And even so, it doesn't matter, because if they didn't love it, someday they can go on a vacation and they'll still talk about this, and it'll, still live in the annals of history.
Remember China?
Remember the wall?
Yeah.
And everyone took pictures with my kids because, I've got a couple blondies, and it's so different to see that. So they would want,
Oh, nice. Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds like fun. So when you do have an exit from Fenris at some point and it's massively successful, where are you going to retire?
So after my next couple of startups, okay. After Fenris,
good point.
We have plenty of ideas. I don't know, my husband and I have talked about it, and we're just not the kind of folks that settle down in one spot or have a retirement home. So whatever technology Airbnb is at that point, I think we would simply move around every 6 months or so. And the criteria are, access to healthcare and Wi-Fi. And we'll just kind of move around and pop back now and then to visit the kids, and head back out for the next adventure.
Just always stay in good weather. That's what I'm going to do. Wherever the weather is good. So in the summer, we go up to Canada, and in the winter, we go down to Florida or California.
So how do you define good weather when, for instance,
70?
Oh, okay. So you actually have a good answer for that. Gotcha.
Yeah, Goldilocks. Okay, so I'm expecting a killer answer here. I need help. I'm unproductive and disorganized. What tools or techniques does Jennifer Linton use to stay organized and productive?
Oh, I'm not a good expert on this one, but if it gets to my Google Calendar, I'll be there. So I basically run my life by the calendar. And I feel like I've talked about my kids plenty, but even to the extent that they're like, "Mom, I have a dance recital," I'm like, "Send me an invite, and I'll be there." So I'm highly driven by
Hmm.
where I'm supposed to be, when I'm supposed to be there, and even to the point that I'll plan ahead. And this is the day that I'm going to work on this proposal or that proposal. But for the most part, my team keeps me very organized, right? So you have to realize what your strength is. That's not my strength. So I surround myself with other people that have those strengths.
Yep, the benefit of the team. Fill in the gaps. I
They're
like
still
that.
wondering what my strengths are. So,
Oh, come on. There are plenty.
uh,
Okay, so final question is what books have been influential in your business and or personal lives? Doesn't have to be a business book.
yeah, so I'm a super voracious reader and always have been, even as a kid. I can remember reading like Lord of the Rings in third grade and then every Hardy Boy mystery right after that, right? It didn't matter the genre. But I haven't been one to read a lot of books lately. I'm mostly spending my time with clients and hearing their stories. And so I don't know if I have a good book to recommend for you, but I did find Rob's The End of Insurance as We Know It to be really interesting. So of course, I want to put a little plug in for that if you haven't already gotten that one. That one really opens your eyes to some of the macro issues around insurance and why it is the way it is, and gives you a new perspective on it.
What about when you were a kid? What was influential? Was it like Lord of the Rings or?
So funny. I don't know why. Like I super fell in love with Pride and Prejudice.
Oh,
Little Women. A lot of girl power stuff. Even back then, I was sort of raised to
hey,
believe that there just
uh,
really aren't boundaries.
my wife is in her 30s and she'll still put the soundtrack and the movies on and force me to sit down and watch it. I
Anne of
don't,
Green Gables too. I bet.
Anne of Green Gables as well. And I know it's
There's a
like
lot of
Prince Edward Island. Like we're going to need to go up there at
old
some
school stuff.
point and
Yeah.
kind of and get around that area. I actually don't mind Little Women because it's based in New England. So I just kind of feel like, oh, that's what New England was like, around that time. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. So I'll read anything from fiction to nonfiction to autobiographical to, uh, you know, just about anything I can get my hands on because I really like the escape for a little bit from, the
yeah.
work. But as far as business books go, I don't know. During my MBA, I remember I took a class where the class actually was a book club. And there were a lot of talking. There's a lot of talking about, a lot of people were talking for a grade in that book club. I remember thinking, huh. And I don't know. I'd rather live it than read it sometimes. So great frameworks out of some of the books, right? There's all the classics and I try to read them to be familiar with it, but I'm more interested in how did that book influence or impact the person I'm talking to? Like what did they pull out of it? That's what I want to learn because it helps me connect to people if we've read a common book.
Yeah. Sometimes I get more from the Amazon comment section,
There's a whole industry in providing executives with the Cliff Notes.
Yeah. Hey,
So they don't have time to read the book.
I'm a man well ahead of my time. I pitched that idea years ago. First of all, I'm going to pat myself on the back. I came up with the renter's insurance idea when I
Oh,
first started in insurance. I just said, I remember approaching my agency head and saying, hey, I think there's something here. The younger people are moving to cities and renters insurance is a bargain. Like and I'm like, we should market to them using postcards. This was like well before the internet. But I was like already like envisioning that. And then the whole book summary thing, I was like thinking, I don't have time to read all of these books. I wish someone would come up with a summary. Hey, I bet people would pay to get a subscription to get all of the books read for them in some way. And then all of a sudden there's like Blinkist and all of these different companies. I'm well ahead of my time. and I
You
have
are, Nick.
nothing to show for it. Too far ahead. I'm the first mover that fails, and the people behind me learn and succeed. That's the story of my life.
Well, what does Hamilton say, right? You miss 100% and no, that's the other guy. But you're not going to, no one's taking away your shot, right? You're going to go for it. And then, of course, there's Wayne Gretzky, who said you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yes.
So you just have to kind of be out there.
Yep. I think I find
that makes renter's insurance a fairly new phenomenon then, seeing as how you're so young.
Yes. Good one. Yes, I'm so young. It's a fairly new thing. Yeah. No, I dated myself with the whole internet comment, unfortunately. Anyways, 2.5 years, we found your luggage. It was a great story. We had some coffee. It was snowing. It was so romantic. I was just getting my startup up and running. We both
had stars in our eyes for our startups.
Yeah,
so
we became good friends. We hang out at conferences, and so I'm honored that you've decided to allow me to interview you first for this podcast. And best of luck going forward. And you're always welcome back.
Thanks, Nick. I cannot tell you how enjoyable this has been. I appreciate it so much, and I'll say that if anyone out there heard this and wants to learn more about Fenris, just go to our website and click on a demo, and 9 times out of 10, I'll be the one doing that for you.
They'll recognize your voice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I will put all of this information in the show notes for anyone that's listening. So again, thank you so much. My guest this week has been Jennifer Linton of Fenris Digital. Thank you.
Thanks, Dick.